in 1943, during the war, John Curtin went to the conference himself as Prime Minister, obviously not from New South Wales, but the Prime Minister, and focus of his address to the delegates was to win support for his conscription policy. That same conference, there was a motion from the Warringah FEC to permit the breeding of rabbits in households. The broad spectrum of debate.
The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people and organisations who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in your world in 2026, then hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members. If you want to join those wonderful supporters of our podcast and financially support our show so we can continue to produce great episodes every week, then we encourage you to click on the link in the show notes and subscribe to join the Patreon community of Socially Democratic. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode.
We are taping this one on a Monday morning on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. Very eager we are this week. And the New South Wales Labor Party Conference is coming up in early July, and Social Democratic is actually going to be holding a show as part of the Fringe program. And so we're super excited about that. But to set the scene, we thought we should get the guy that organises the conference, the General Secretary of the New South Wales branch of the Australian Labor Party, Dom Ofner, on the show to talk about the conference, talk about there's an election coming up in New South Wales next year, campaigns and everything else. Dom, welcome to Social Democratic.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for having me.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty of campaigns and the conference and whatnot, the first time you've been on the show, so we should introduce you to our audience. How and I always start with people call it their Labor story. It doesn't have to be their Labor story, but what's your background? Like, how the hell did you get involved in the Labor Party, and what were the moments or people that shaped your Labor values that brought you to this work?
Like many people who are involved in the party from my generation, we grew up in John Howard's. For me, I think it is the case for many people, growing up with him as Prime Minister, seeing what he was doing, the agenda he was pushing. It was pretty politically awakening for me. I remember walking with my family across the Sydney Harbour Bridge on that walk for reconciliation in 2000. I was only 10 years old at the time, but even in that mindset, knowing that there was something wrong, that obviously an injustice had happened and happened over many years, and it was wrong that the Prime Minister wouldn't say sorry. It was a Labor government that would apologise, and ultimately we did. But it was later that year, December 2000, my dad took me and my sister. He would, as part of, he was involved in the Smith family, deliver Christmas hampers to obviously people who were doing it tough that time of year, and I was pretty confronting the standards, the injustice again that many people were confronting, and I was pretty upset that night. And I remember my dad saying, sort of half jokingly, but it stayed with me, that's why we have to vote Labor. That memory has stayed with me, and about what Labor governments do, why we need Labor governments, and continued to be politically aware. 15 years old, joined the party, got involved in Young Labor, volunteered on the campaigns for my local members of parliament and candidates in the inner west of Sydney, and have been involved in my local branches and now in the professional side of the party as well, in the party office.
When your dad said to you, that's why we need to vote Labor, did you then work out in your head that I need to get involved? Like, voting Labor is one thing, right? But to actually get involved in a political party is actually a very different matter. And I think it's actually a unique experience that a lot of us don't, I think we probably take for granted, right? But we wanted to get more people involved. Why did you choose to think, it's not just voting Labor, I actually need to get involved?
Yeah, I mean, I do remember having a great image of Kim Beazley in my mind at that time as well, when he said that. Kim, obviously the leader of the party at the time, and I think would have been, I think it's safe to say, the best Prime Minister we never had. but that idea of voting Labor and then obviously moving beyond that to joining Labor and working for Labor, it was just, I think, a logical progression, especially, again, the policies of the Howard government, the 2001 election, in my view, the appalling politicisation and weaponisation of refugees, the 2004 election, and after that, the work choices agenda. Various moments and various sort of issues emerge, and that it takes that support for the party at each point one step further to then joining the party, and then ultimately working for the party as I have now, sort of on two stints. This is my second stint with the ALP office, a bit as a vocation in many ways to serve a wider movement.
On that journey to becoming General Secretary, when you think back to the different roles that you've had, what are some of the key roles or campaigns along the way that shaped you as a campaigner?
The campaign that I think stays with me, and it's funny I say that because it was a defeat, and such a big defeat, but the 2011 state election, it's often the defeats and the hard results where you learn the most, and obviously the circumstances that led to that defeat, real low point for the party here in New South Wales, and obviously had national implications as well. But that was, particularly now in my role, a reminder of what happens when things go wrong, when the party loses sight of its mission, of its purpose, is too focused on itself and not on the people that Labor governments exist to serve and represent. But then also coming back in 2020, the Eden Monaro by-election, that was a campaign that was completely turned upside down because of the COVID environment that we were fighting that by-election in. And that I think really does mark as well the turning point in the trajectory of the party after that devastating defeat in 2019. In New South Wales, 2 defeats in 2019. The turning point, a very tough win against the odds at the time when Scott Morrison was seen as invincible with his popularity. A really, really significant turning point where those in the party, we believe we can win the next election, and ultimately we did. And that was a really important source of confidence in ourselves about what we can do. But I think also bringing the step to the party in not just New South Wales but nationally, and supporting the Prime Minister, the then opposition leader, now Prime Minister's leadership, that we could do it.
I mean, this is a huge question here in terms of thinking back from 2011 all the way through to the state election victory in March 2023. 23, yeah. I mean, I was there that night when the then elected Premier Chris Minns gets up and gives his speech, and you're sort of talking of punters in the room, Labor Party apparatchiks and campaigners who'd been around for a while. I think the one word that I would use to describe the feeling in the room that night was it was almost like relief that we'd finally jagged a win. And there was a lot, the second word that we used a lot that night was 2011. 2011 came up, right? It was like this thing hanging over the party, over its head. It was like a shit cloud that it just couldn't shake, and it felt like it had shaken that off finally, that experience. And I know that you'd been in and out of the party over that time, but certainly even whilst working in the party, but also as an observer, but still an active person within the party. What are some of the key things that needed to happen for the party to get out of that 2011 rut and into that space where it did win in 2023? I
mean, I think a really important way of describing it is actually my colleague in the office, George Simon. He sort of coined it in a speech he gave to a state conference. He would have been the 2021 or 2022 state conference, where he talked about the hunger to win. Like, it's very easy, and especially when you're in opposition or in the dying days of a government, it's very easy to let all the problems and the internals, the internal agendas define what we spend our time on. There's always, in political parties, there's always a problem. There's always a crisis. There's always a dispute, factional dispute, interfactional dispute, branch dispute. and that's a good thing. That internal political competition is fundamentally a good thing, and inevitability about politics. But it's when that becomes the main game, and for a long time, and really starting in that final term of that government, that did become the main game for the party in New South Wales. And we therefore lost sight of what was important and what mattered. And I think that low point of the defeats in 2019, that realisation that things couldn't continue like that, and again, the maturity across the party, across the factions, across the movement, so Macquarie Street, the Sussex Street and the union movement, sort of all coming to that realisation. There's never going to be an end to the internal tensions and the disagreements and disputes, and that's inevitable. But we need to manage that. We need to make sure that we deal with those things, that they don't play out in a way that distracts us from our core purpose. And I think that wasn't just key to winning the 2023 state election. Like the recognition and the understanding of that approach took place well before 2023. It took place a number of years earlier, and was key to, frankly, I think the federal Labor success in 2022. The New South Wales branch is the biggest branch of the party in the country, in the biggest state with the most number of federal seats. And as Paul Keating would say, and imagine still does believe, where goes New South Wales Labor, so goes federal Labor. And again, that a change, that approach that we've taken, I think, in the last the last few years was critical to, obviously, not just March 2023, but May 2022, to get the New South Wales branch in a fit for purpose, fit state, a strong state to win government, and as we did last year, and hopefully next March, to hold government for the long term.
And it's a great place to be when you've got not only the Prime Minister from your own state, but also being in state government as well. It's a long way away from the dark days of 2011 as well. So, it's something to be celebrated. And I guess coming up on the 4th and 5th of July, it's the annual state conference, and it is an opportunity to celebrate and reflect and then start to plan going forward. So no doubt the Prime Minister will come and deliver a speech. And so will Chris talk us a bit about there's almost a mythology around the New South Wales state conference, Labor conference. And I don't know whether it's just born out of just good PR by everyone from New South Wales running around the country telling everyone else that it's an amazing conference, or even just reading old books like, Graham Richardson's book. I mean, as a young man, I remember being at my very first NUS conference, reading Whatever It Takes, sort of sitting in the back of the room, bored out of my mind, listening to all these, mindless debates. But I was enthralled by this book and the lore of the, Sussex Street and the conference and whatnot. But, it is arguably the most significant state conference in the country. Why do you think that is? Why does it differ from other gatherings of party people across the country, including our national conference, which is going to be happening later this year as well?
Yeah, look, I think you're right that it is a conference that is steeped in tradition, held at the town hall, the Sydney's town hall, which we coin as the secular cathedral of the Labor Party. And there have been a couple of instances in recent decades where the conference hasn't been held at town hall, and they haven't gone well. And the lesson in that is, it has to be held at town hall. But I mean, what sets it apart from other Labor conferences? Look, there's over 800 delegates. It's twice the size of the national conference, and significantly bigger than any other state conference. That's over 800 delegates, and then many more observers on top of that. As I said, it works, and it's meaning because it's the supreme decision-making body of the party. That's what the rules say. But it's more than just what the rules, the convention of the party, the meaning that is attached to the conference by the parliamentary party, by the party machine, by the rank and file, by the union movement, in giving the respect to the conference and the meaning that the conference has for each of those parts of the party is really important to elevating its status. And there's some really, really practical and, frankly, famous examples. Neville Wran it was the state conference where he chose to announce his resignation as Premier. And that was clearly recognition of the role that the conference played for him, for the party, but ultimately also for the success of his government. In 1943, the key to during the war, John Curtin went to the conference himself as Prime Minister, obviously not from New South Wales, but the Prime Minister, and focus of his address to the delegates was to win support for his conscription policy, taking it to the conference to get the support of the party for that. Very significant debate. Obviously, at that same conference, there was a motion from the Warringah FEC to permit the breeding of rabbits in households. So the broad spectrum of debate. The 1949 conference is where Chifley gave the Light on the Hill address. It's that convention. So there's the rule, but the broader meaning and the significance of it really relies on the respect that all parts of the party have for it. And we refer to that in New South Wales as the McKell Model.
Explain that.
So the party split in the 1930s, a significant dispute over the direction of the party policy-wise, but ultimately the role of Jack Lang and how the party would work and how the government would interact with the various wings of the party, and significant disputes on that led to a split, and Jack Lang splitting off from the party. We were in opposition for a significant, basically for the rest of that decade. Bill McKell became the leader and ultimately became the Premier. And what he recognised, and essentially the support he received from the party, was built around, we're going to win government if we're going to stay in government. The government has to be able to do its job. We have to be able to govern not just for the specific interests of the Labor Party, we have to govern for the entire state. And with that was the expectation that ultimately the conference would support the agenda of the government. But that wasn't just a rubber stamp. With that came the recognition that the government had to manage and ultimately nurture the various parts of the party. It had to persuade and bring the union movement along with it, bring the rank and file along with it, and the role of the party office in helping to facilitate that was really, really significant. And so we've had situations in the past where the state government has had to go to the conference and essentially seek almost the permission of the conference to pursue agendas and to pursue particular policy directions, and therefore the debates are really high quality. There's the need for persuasion in that. Neville Wran had to go to the conference to seek support for essentially what would have been the sale of Lotto, and it was defeated initially. And though he recognised a compromise had to happen, and a new proposal was taken to a subsequent conference that actually heard the initial concerns of the conference, and a compromise was reached and it passed. The question of the Opera House was actually a significant debate at a New South Wales conference, and the government of the day had to persuade the delegates to get that support. Was successful, but not without the need for listening, engagement, persuasion. And there have been some instances where the government of the day has had in the case of 1997, there was a proposal leading up to that conference to allow the privatisation of our electricity network in that first term of the Carr government. The conference was going to very clearly reject it. The Carr government got the message, listened to it, and didn't proceed with that plan. And some would say that was actually really important because the government dropped off its agenda, acknowledged that maybe a lot of those free market policies that had taken place had gone too far. The Liberal national opposition went to the 99 election promising privatisation, and it was a key part of our re-election. Now, there had been the very famous instance where in 2008, one of those conferences that wasn't held at the town hall, where the conference made a clear decision, and there was effectively a breakdown in the McKell Model, because still went about trying to proceed with that policy. And the convention broke down. Yes, there was an issue on rules, and was the government defying a decision of the conference? Can the conference actually make a decision along those lines? That is a very significant debate, and would test all kind of conventions. But the fundamental convention of the government cannot defy the conference, it should never really be in a position where its agenda is blocked because of the important role that Labor governments need to take of bringing the conference, bringing the party, and by that I mean the union movement, the rank and file, the party organisation, helping to bring the party with the government, and that is I think that tradition, that convention, means that the debates at the New South Wales Conference take place with a lot of passion. They can be very fierce. In years gone past, they were very personal. Fortunately, we don't have that anymore. I've no doubt Paul Keating was the parliamentary debater that he was because of the skills he learned on the floor of the New South Wales Labor Conference. And it was because those debates meant something. That it's been so important to the success of New South Wales Labor governments over going back to the early 1940s. And when it works, we're strong. And when it doesn't work, well, we saw in that 2007 to 2011 start really with that 2008 conference of what happens when the conference is disrespected.
And even the way that the branch sets up the conference floor is unique as well, in which you all face each other. And I think that there's a practicality to that, but there's a symbolism as well, and that is, I think that all political movements need to have a good hard look at each other, when having to make tough decisions. If you can't look one another in the eye, then even when you're having a normal argument with someone in a pub, right? If you're not looking them in the eye, then you're not fair dinkum. And I think there's something about the way that you actually set the conference up that forces you all to look at each other, as opposed to what's happening in society in general. Is we're all operating in silos, and we're all just doing groupthink. And so we're not seeing this convergence of diverse views being put into this sort of pressure cooker situation, in which then it says, and we all have to get through this and come out with a consensus position in the end, and our party's going to be better for it. I mean, is there intentionality around that, do you think, apart from it looking amazing?
I mean, it looks amazing, but you're right. The way it's set up, and therefore the atmosphere that setup creates makes it a really powerful environment. I've no doubt that back in the days there would be someone speaking from the floor, and there would be a couple of delegations right near the microphone that were echoing all kinds of things to a speaker, which is again unique to that setting. But when the leaders walk through the doors and to make their way to the stage, it's a really powerful image. Particularly, bear in mind that Albo for many years was speaking at those conferences, and the vast majority of instances not in support of the leadership of the New South Wales branch. I think it does mean something. It does mean a lot to him being able to return to that conference. When he returned to that conference in 2022 as an elected Prime Minister, it was a very, very, very emotional occasion.
I can imagine.
Putting aside, the history and what the debates that he'd been involved in, he's someone who, while not bound by any of the decisions of the conference as Prime Minister, but he recognises the meaning and the role that conference plays. And he was really, really emotionally affected by just how powerful that entry was for him.
Particularly, I mean, as you said, like he cut his teeth in that room.
that conference in some ways and that branch made who the politician that he is today. And to walk back in there, it's like coming back to your family in some ways, isn't it? And actually saying, look, Mum, Dad, look, I made it. I'm now the Prime Minister. No, I appreciate all the work you've done. Interesting, you're just talking before about, the history of the conference and its significance contributes to this law. And it's more than mythology, right? And so it's built on this history, but also you can't just live on the history, right? It needs to continue to adapt and develop. What have you noticed about the way that the conference has changed, even in the time that you've been involved in the party over the years, to enable the membership to have its views brought into this debate, or just, because obviously the way that we operated in the year 2000 is fundamentally different to the way we operate now. And so how does a conference that is so old and so steeped in tradition and history, how does it continue to modernise itself as society in general modernises? What have you noticed has changed?
Well, it was a 3-day conference on a long weekend that had evening sessions on the Saturday and Sunday.
Wow.
So that there's just the realities and practicalities of modern life that have meant that it's no longer. The first conference I attended was on the June long weekend, not 3 days, but it had been over a long weekend. And I just, very, very brave group of party officials who decided to
put that on them
on a long weekend, even 2 days as opposed to 3 days. And sometimes it was on the weekend of the AFL and NRL grand finals as well. So that reality of modern life. In terms of what else has changed, I think there's still the fears clash on Saturday morning about the administration and rules of the party. There are genuine disagreements that exist and differing views that exist in the party, but they were some really personal and nasty debates, and we just, for good reason, that just not happen anymore. That says a lot about the culture of a modern political party. Just what's acceptable behaviour.
What's the focus this year at the conference? Like, what's the headline pitch for people who are, particularly in New South Wales, that are thinking about coming along? Why should you come along this year? What's going to be discussed, or what's the focus going to be?
I think for any New South Wales conference, it's always important to as a demonstration or projection of the strength of the New South Wales branch, because, as I said a bit earlier, when the New South Wales branch is strong, that means federal Labor is strong. And especially when our state conference is only, I think, 3 or so weeks before the national conference, the demonstration of that and the tone that we can take to that is going to be a really important foundation for the national conference in Adelaide. It is also the last state conference before the next state election, and therefore setting the platform, the organisational priorities of the branch in the months leading up to the state election, the final report by the state government, by the Premier to the conference about what the government has done, and what I would expect is outlining the start of our future plans to not just go to the election with those plans, but the foundations for what we'll do if we are fortunate enough to have a second term.
I mean, that's a good time to talk maybe about campaign preparedness. As you did say, this is the last conference before the next election. It's 271 days right now till election day. I'm sure you're counting. 13th of March. New South Wales Labor's in a minority government, but seeking to obviously ensure they get a majority this time around and get a second term. Recent polling, New South Wales-based polling in the Resolve poll of May 20 had Labor's primary on 32, the Coalition on 26, Greens on 10, One Nation on 22. And there was a Resolve poll, which was a national poll, to be fair, that came out today. I don't know if you caught those figures as well, but at a national level, Labor's primary is at 28, the Coalition's at 20, One Nation's at 29. And if you pull out the state-by-state numbers, in New South Wales, Labor's at 28, One Nation is at 30. And I just want to get your thoughts on this rise of One Nation, certainly in the polls anyway. And they had a pretty good result at an actual election, which was in South Australia, and that was sort of, I guess, their first testing ground. Then we had the by-election in Farrer, federal seat of in southern New South Wales. It's happened so quickly. That's the thing that I can't sort of grapple, is that they've gone from polling at a federal election of 6.5 points to now we're seeing these numbers of 30% primary. What's your initial reflection on this surge that we've seen towards this far right political party that was once regarded as a bit of a backwater?
Yeah, I mean, it's my job to always be concerned about these things, and anyone who says that, rule out the line that the only poll that matters is the one on election day. Well, of course, people who work in politics, who follow politics, they always have an eye to the polls, and not just, it should never just be about one poll, but the trend. And the trend is there. The trend is obvious. It does throw up the fact that what was a traditional contest in most seats, Labor v Coalition, and a smattering of seats where our opponents would be either an independent or the Greens. That's very much changed, and we should, it's changed over recent cycles, but we're seeing a significant change in that, where we're likely to see any number of contests that aren't just between Labor and the Coalition, but would clearly be between Labor and One Nation. The other point I'd make, though, and this is, obviously the polls are there, the trend is real. People who work in politics need to also take these polls are a snapshot in time. A mistake that we can make is sort of just see polls as a prediction of what would happen in an election. In the case federally, an election in 2 years' time, a state election in 10 months' time. Polls are a snapshot in time. The key job for us is to, obviously, all the various bits of research that parties undertake is to move beyond seeing something as just a snapshot in time, and then working out the best way and the most effective way to build a strategy to win the support of people. And research is a tool to help do that. If it's just polls are just looked at as a snapshot in time, then it's not the effective way to use or to look at opinion polls.
Yeah, it's one of the things that annoys me about the political discourse in this country. And so you saying that's music to my ears, Dom. A lot of people, and we talk about this on the show often, about this view that demographics is destiny. That that's the poll. Those people that sit in the room and go, that's the poll. We're done. But there's never I like the person in the room that goes, okay, that's fine. That's where we are right now. Well, what do we do to change that? And I'm sure that those conversations have been had behind closed doors as opposed to in the public domain. But I don't want to draw you on to this too much, because I don't want to give away what you're thinking. And you've got a bit of time, right, between now and election day. Victoria's obviously up next. That'll be interesting to see. And I know that I get a sense that certainly the Vic branch and folks in positions of power are trying to work out how to deal with this. But even I'm looking at how we can approach this One Nation issue. One of the things I'm taking away from it is that it's not sticky to assume that once people have moved on to One Nation, we're not going to get them back. I think would be a mistake to make. Even that Resolve poll today, one of the questions we're asked is, how firm are you with your vote? And 27% said not firm. That's a lot of voters.
Yeah.
So that if they can move there, they can come back as well, is what I take away. But I just wonder about how we're trying to, because you can sort of see, like certainly you could see Peter Malinauskas in the state campaign grappling with ways in which he could message that. And I think that maybe on reflection, they might look at that and go, no, I don't know if we got that right. You can see a lot of people online talking about getting stuck in a polling because she's flying around on a private jet. And I actually think that, people who are voting for One Nation right now, I think that's fine. I think abusing One Nation voters of being racist or attacking them over because they're stupid is patronising. That's not going to work either. I don't know what's in your mind right now about how broadly do we approach this without you actually giving away how you think.
Look, as a general, I think the support that One Nation is receiving at the moment, in measured in polls, it is the symptom of what has been going on and building up in our economy for a very long time that predates Labor governments federally and in New South Wales and in South Australia. The Prime Minister's right that for too many people, they feel the economy's not working for them. And I think when we look at it in this way, 6 years ago was when COVID, that outbreak of COVID, early 2020, our lives changed. The way people work changed. The lockdown started. And while that's not necessarily at the forefront of people's minds now, and they don't sort of talk about COVID in an unprompted way, we had 2020, 2021, disruption caused by COVID. Then 2022, you have the obviously Russia and Ukraine conflict, the impact that then had on supply chains, the flow on that, the impact on global inflation, leading to the RBA increasing the cash rate, and that the impact of that, and within the course of that period, we've had a lot of bad news upon bad news. Not the fault, and people know it's not the fault of any particular government. They know also that these challenges are built up over a long time, but then the false dawns, the false hopes throughout that. We thought that our interest rates were trending down, and then obviously late last year, the sense of a different trajectory with inflation and the economy. And that's really hard for people. I can understand why people are frustrated. We had here in New South Wales a government that made those pressures worse, keeping wages below the cost of living, that privatised our electricity network. So decisions of government that predate, that go back a long time. And you can see why people therefore think that the economy, or are feeling the economy's not working for them. That requires more than just messaging. Frankly, it requires more than just the question about what your election strategy and your election message is going to be. It does require substantial action. Acknowledging the frustrations is one thing. What's more important, and ultimately where I think why there's the need for and the role of Labor governments now more than ever is that the changes that we need to see delivered in response to these pressures and anxieties and frustrations are the changes that only Labor governments can deliver. It's so important that we have Labor governments federally at state levels. The alternative is what would happen under a coalition government. Can't answer what would happen at the moment. They don't have any sort of coherent plans, and the question that I think people will start asking, particularly because of the polls, is it's one thing for one nation to point out all the things that are wrong. It's another thing to say, well, what they would actually do and whether they actually have the capability and the capacity to do those things.
That leads me into wanting to ask you questions around the sort of campaign modernisation and where you see campaigns heading. And the first thing that comes to mind right now, that the decisions that campaigners are going to have to make in New South Wales in March next year and in Victoria this year is this sort of this traditional strategy of our pathway to insert the number that you need to form government, right? I think it's 40, is it 47?
47 here, yeah.
New South Wales, 76 in federally and like 45 in Victoria. The traditional way obviously was target seat list, which normally would be a seat that is either it is marginal, like it's a tight margin, either held by Labor, so therefore need to sandbag, or a seat that you want to go after that's held by your opponent. And then the other seats that are not on the target seat list are normally seats that Labor hold by whopping majorities, normally in our sort of our heartland, wherever that geographically may be in the city and the regions, and then seats that are just well out of reach, not going to bother going for. And it feels like that's now changing, because there's a whole bunch of seats that we hold that are in our heartland that are now under threat of being lost to another party, maybe One Nation or maybe the Libs, depending on what happens in preferences. Does that then force you to then reimagine what a quote-unquote target seat list is? Or Or do you completely change the strategy in that you sort of have to, because, we've only got a certain amount of money. That's why we always had a target seat list, because we can't give you all, the central campaign cannot fund you all, right? So you safe
limited resources, yeah.
Absolutely. So you safe Labor seat guys, you're just going to have to just be happy with your one Tats Lotto and you're going to look after. You have to worry about campaigning. But now they've got a campaign, but as a central campaign, you're like going, damn, I don't know if I can actually fund them as well as going for our target seat list. So, I mean, how do you think this through now in this sort of place where we sit with One Nation being a threat in all sorts of weird places?
It's a emerging reality of elections. In 2022, the Teals did this to the Liberal Party. Their heartland seats lost to independents. I say to people all the time, there's no such thing as a safe seat. Forget the pendulum. But the idea of a pendulum and where you are does not matter, because voters know that there's an alternative. And the really important thing within that, why we say that, is you can't fatten a pig on market day. You can't come election time say, oh, this seat, we've got to put resources there. The most important thing, and I think this is the most important thing as well in terms of how we deal with the question of things like One Nation, but also just the threats that might come from minor parties or independents. Delivery, governments and local members in those seats that actually can demonstrate a clear record of delivery, that they have got things done. Again, really important for the state government ahead of March is electorates that under previous governments, coalition as well as Labor governments, were denied resources, were denied the investment. One of the most important things that this Labor government has done is build public preschools in areas that had never had any kind of government intervention in early childhood education before. And it was based on SES levels. And of course, what that meant was suburbs and therefore electorates that considered safe Labor seats. But these weren't decisions based on the margin of the seat. They were based on need. And it's been a Labor government that's delivered in those areas. And that's why it's almost too late when you get to an election. It says, we might be in trouble in this seat because of a challenge, depending on who it is, but not a traditional Labor coalition challenge. Regardless of the margin a member has, they need to have been working throughout that entire term. And governments can't just make decisions like they used to, and it was wrong. We saw this where with the pork barrelling scandals that have existed. A handful of marginal seats, here's the money, what projects do they need? Areas need to be funded based on need, the right projects, regardless of election. And if that's done, we should have clear and comprehensive records of delivery that we can point to come election time.
I was going to ask you a question about what's changed over the last 2 decades, but before we get to that, the other question I was going to ask you was what hasn't changed, or what have you found over your time as a campaigner remains the same? And I'm wondering, is that the answer, that it's just good quality candidates out there in the community communicating what either we promise what we will do if we're in opposition, or what we have done whilst we're in government and what we'll do in the future? Is that the mainstay that should never change, or is there other things as well that you think we should never let go of?
There's always a new tactic, technique. The world of digital campaigning is so fast changing. Every election there's something new. But fundamentally, the best campaign tactics will never beat a campaign that's got a clear strategy and a clear message. I think that's the first thing. We've been the beneficiaries of that. I think in the 2019 federal election, we learned that lesson the hard way. But to your point, I think absolutely right, like demonstrating that we've just been getting on with the job. We're in government federally at a state level, so we're coming at it from this perspective, being able to demonstrate that we have been making a practical and meaningful difference in the lives. Never, the job's not done. Governments have to keep moving and keep moving forward, driving change and progress. But those 2 points, the need for a good message and strategy with real substance to back it up. People see through spin now. People are understandably cynical. They see through spin, they see through focus group messages that we prioritise message over substance. If you're trying to spin your way through and you don't have the record of delivery, people will see through that and see through it far more than I think previously. And that's because of the advent of I think all the new ways of getting media and consuming information. I mean, people are are far more aware of what's going on or what hasn't been going on.
Thinking ahead into the next campaign for you guys in New South Wales, what is the areas of focus in terms of resourcing new strategies or new platforms or new techniques in which you can be a far more effective campaign? Where do you think campaigning is heading? What direction do you want to take the campaign as the campaign director?
It all boils down to getting your message in front of people and all the new ways that are available. But we're not going to broadcast them here in case the coalition is watching. But,
they are. I guarantee it.
But I think that's always, and every cycle there's something new. In saying that, earlier this year, some changes were passed to the New South Wales electoral laws that allow the Electoral Commission to crack down on AI-generated images. So we saw in the last federal election, I don't really know who they were, but they wasn't a Liberal Party, but they were supporting the Liberal Party, producing AI-generated images of depicted Labor members doing things that they just hadn't done. And there's a far more regulation that's coming into place in New South Wales to prevent those misleading images, and also requiring a statement in case there is digitally generated images that's been done using AI. I think that's important. There's a lot of opportunities that come with AI, not just when it comes to elections, but the world generally. But there's a lot of things that are problematic and concerning, and that we don't want our elections to be influenced by the misuse of that technology, and we've got that now coming into place. I'm pretty sure it's a nation-leading reform that we're starting here in New South Wales. I think that's just going to be the start of that discussion about the role of that, and other jurisdictions doing their own, looking at how we've done it here, lessons from that, and it's going to be an ongoing debate in election campaigns.
What do you want the campaign to be fought over in 2027?
Well, I think all elections are fundamentally come back to a question about the future, and how people see that future for themselves and their families. I think we're in this period now of significant uncertainty globally, but obviously that's having an impact in Australia and in our state. The world is changing. People know that, they accept that. How we manage that change in the interests of people, working families, working people and their community is really important. The role of government in demonstrating who has the answers to that for the future, and that question about what that future looks like, is going to be key. So all elections are really a choice about the future and what the future looks like. I don't think this election will be any different. Obviously, the answers that we put forward, the debates and what some of those specific issues are, will be different. They are in every election, but I think that'll be the fundamental choice. State Labor, as with federal Labor, we've laid some really strong foundations. Coming in, having to address some of the big challenges that we inherited, dealing with new challenges that have emerged during the course of the last 3 years. But because of those foundations that we've laid, we're in a strong position to deal with what's next and take things to the next step. With that clarity of plan and direction, the contrast obviously is with our opponents, the Liberals and Nationals in various seats, One Nation in other seats, but generally those right-wing parties, as well as the Greens in some parts of the state. The question comes is, well, what is the plan? What is their plan? At the moment, it's not clear. And then it is also the question of whether they have the capability to deliver what they say they will. And again, I think significant questions about that, about the coalition generally, regardless of what level of government they're at or they're seeking to be in office in, their ability to do what they say they will do, either because of serious questions around their competence, but also their prescriptions invariably do hurt people and leave people worse off. And so again, it all boils back to that question about what the plans for the future are. and what that future looks like.
And I guess a lot of it will be discussed at the conference coming in July. So it's July 4 and 5. If you're a party member and you want to attend, how do you get? Do you need to register? What's the process?
You do need to register. Again, once upon a time, you could just turn up with your party card and walk through the front steps of Town Hall. The reality is security these days, and the world we're in means that we need people to register beforehand. Keep an eye out for your emails. Be information on our website as well about how to register, and I really encourage people to register because there's no other political conference in this country, or frankly no other political event in this country quite like a New South Wales Labor Conference.
And Socially Democratic will be there to sample it. We've got a show on the Saturday, I think, during the Fringe at 4 p.m. And I think it's first in, best dressed, right, for the Fringe events. You just walk in, grab a seat. We're not ticketing anything, so.
I think that's right. I must admit, you did say at the beginning that I was organising the conference. I must. There is a team at the heavy lifting, the hard work is our organising team, our organisers, our staff have been working around the clock ahead of the conference. And some people can think that these things just happen. They don't. And I really want to acknowledge the team at the New South Wales Labor head office, all that they have done and will continue to do over the coming weeks to pull off that weekend.
You're a good party boss there. Give him a shout out. Dom, thanks very much for taking time out of your schedule to come on the show today. I really do appreciate it. Good luck with the conference. I'm sure we'll talk to you before the next election, but good luck with the election campaign as well. And we'll see you up in Sydney.
Thanks. See you at conference.
Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like the show, then join our Patreon community for early and ad-free access to each episode. We regularly take questions and comments from our Patreon members, so get in there if you want to have your say. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.